Another Dualistic Unity Raw. This time, Andrew has moved locations. He is no longer where he was last time. He is now in the San Diego area. How's it going, Andrew?
It's going well. Yes, you can see for those on YouTube or on the Twitch live stream right now that yeah, just got my bed behind me. Got a little studio set up. So it's like I don't have a full desk on this one like I had last time. I have like a kitchen table that's probably like 2 feet by 2 feet. So I got my light that I use, front light thing by my kitchen sink on the counter, and then I got the table about 2 feet from that. So we're making it work. I threw a little picture on my Instagram story if you're actually curious what it looks like. But yes, I'm in Pacific Beach, in San Diego, about a mile from the beach for the next 2 weeks. So yeah, LA, Venice was a lot of fun. I was able to see a friend in Newport Beach yesterday, who lives there, kind of stopped there. It's like halfway, a little less than halfway, down to San Diego. So yeah, been enjoying the road trip so far and happy to chat, obviously on Patreon. If anyone's got any questions about anything, more than happy to discuss it there. But yeah, been a lot of fun, enjoying the time, getting out there and having different conversations, and excited for San Diego. Unlike LA, I have been to San Diego before. I had a ex-girlfriend who lived here, so it's kind of funny because there's a few places like right around the corner from my apartment that we went to a lot. So it's like always kind of weird to experience those things, and knowing that like where I was, as we've been talking about, like future self, current self, past self sort of feelings, like knowing that went into this Trader Joe's that was like a grocery store like 2 blocks from my apartment now 2 years ago, and then now being like having no idea I would rent an Airbnb like 2 years later right down the block. I don't know, it's just kind of funny thinking about stuff like that. But yeah, excited for the time here.
That's the stuff you got to think about. Like, that's the stuff that life is really all about, is the recognition of the journey, of just the twists and turns and things that you could have never expected to happen, things that you would have never thought to yourself, like 5 years from now, everything I currently hold dear is probably going to be gone. And I'm going to have built an entirely new life and or loop within this life with a bunch of other stuff that I value that will eventually be gone. And it's just really interesting because we never take it into consideration. This is one of the biggest problems with being a teenager, I find, is that everything about it, you're just like, this is it. This is the end all and be all of what my existence is going to be forever. And there's so much riding on everything you do. Like, if you upset one friend as a teenager, you're just like, oh my God, nobody's ever going to like me. I'm never going to have friends. I'm going to be a social outcast. I'm going to be Quasimodo ringing the bells of Notre Dame. Like, it's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible forever. And it's just because there is just less context. There are less moments where you've gone through that and come out the other side and went, oh, look, another friend. And then you go through the whole loop again, and you just keep doing that in different variations and learning from those different variations. And so it's really just a matter of time and experience. But I mean, how nice would it be to be told that as a teenager? It's like, this is going to suck. There's nothing you can do to not make it suck. There's going to be moments that really, really, really suck. And then the moments that are really, 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 really nice, you're going to fuck up by chasing. Welcome to the cycle. That would be nice to be given that kind of context, but that's it. It's going through stuff. And then all of a sudden we're just like, oh, I can go through that, and life carries on. But that's true about everything, about losing a job, losing an apartment, getting evicted, all that stuff. Like, it sucks, but you learn about it. You learn from it, right? This is the thing I often say to parents who are having problems getting their children out of the house when their children are like 25 or even 30 years old. And usually through the course of the questioning, there will come this recognition that the parent has this standard that they want their child to move into from their home because they've worked so hard to have that standard in their own life. But they forget that at one point, that parent lived in some scummy little apartment with some sketchy fucking roommate, more than likely. And that's the reason that they value the home that they have. They value the job that they have. They value the work that they've done. They value all the things that they've built their life to be because of the context. Right? Whereas they actually just want their child to move out of that context into something comparable. And it's like, but what about all the experience of moving into a shitty apartment? So that way you can appreciate the less shitty apartment, which makes you appreciate the awesome apartment and the prospect of maybe land and your own space down the road because you're working for all that shit. And so like there's a road that we don't appreciate because it's unpleasant. But that's the whole point, is to learn from it and make something out of it. Like there's going to be a lot of friends that you're going to lose in your life. There's going to be a lot of people that for no good reason just decide, I don't want to change anymore. I don't want to join you as you changed. In fact, I'm offended by your changing, and therefore I'm going in my own direction. And that's okay. That's okay, because every time one of them leaves, there's space for somebody else who doesn't share that sentiment. There's space for something else. There's space for another experience, space. I keep wanting to say space. I'm not quite sure why, but there is. And that's the whole point. It's just to go along the journey. And this is why it's funny, because the older I get, the more I start to recognize that time seems to be going a little bit slower, which is interesting because I think that's directly related to how much I just try to be where I am. Because a lot of people my age are saying like time's moving faster. And I find that really interesting as well, because how much of that is just the case that you've seen more of it? And so you're just taking it for granted.
It really is. Honestly, I felt like my time in LA, I was there for a week, was so much longer than a week. It was really interesting to experience that, because, and I have been more attentive to where I'm at, more involved in the situations, but it's like that combined with, especially just the thing that's been hitting me is uncertainty, like the rawness, the gravity of how much is uncertain right now, but how there's a 0% chance that I have any idea what's coming next. And so there was that insight was hitting me all week. And so it was always just this, it wasn't a focus on the moment. Like I can't express enough how different of a feeling it is. It's like there's just nothing left that could possibly be focused on. So it's not that I'm choosing to focus on the present moment. It's like it was hard to fathom something else to think about, because any way that I thought about what's to come or a situation coming up, or, you know, going over to a house with a bunch of random people that I don't know, like there's a 0% chance of me knowing how that's going to go, what it's going to mean, where it's going to lead to. And so it's nothing, there's like nothing to grasp onto. It's so interesting. So I think that really exacerbated just how long everything felt, because there's an attention to it, and like attention slows things down, or at least seems to, because it's not even, like we've talked about before, it's not even slowing down, because that's a relative perception. It's just, it is what it is. It relative to how another mentality may perceive a day to go or time to move, it seems slower, but it just is how it's going. And so beyond that, what you were saying about finality and just the concern with things, and like being in this situation that I'm in now, like 2 years ago, I would not have guessed that I would be, you know, staying in this Airbnb and doing the things that I'm doing every day, in the mentality that I'm in, and seeing the world the way that I do. There would be no way. And yet at that point, there was lots of things I would get hung up on. We're constantly getting hung up on things. But if you think back to, you know, the gripes you had a year ago today, you know, all the things you were so concerned about, you probably can't even remember what those were, because those things, those concerns, those fears, those worries are never final. Like we go through them, we go in and out of them all the time. And so I think as you get through those teenage years, where each time you go through those feelings of worry, concern, whatever, it's like you're kind of going through them for the first time. And so you don't realize how much of a ebb and flow life is. But the more experience you get with that, the more you go through it, the more you're willing to just continue to step into it and find out. Uncertainty being a super helpful component of that, it gets easier, because then you just broaden that sort of context of the situation more and more and more. And you can see, you have so many examples you can point to where you had this thought, like, this is the worst thing ever. I'm never going to get through this. This is so scary. what is this going to mean about me? And then a week later, it's like it's on to something else, or you're feeling better. You don't even remember what that feeling was like to go through that. And then you just keep going through it. And so every situation, as heavy as it can feel, doesn't feel quite so heavy the more you go through them. There's a context around it, so it doesn't quite sink you the way that it did the first couple times. So I think even just having that wherewithal going through your teenage years, especially if you're a teenager going through stuff, and understanding like it's not going to, for almost everyone, it's not going to be the greatest period of your life. For most people, it's the worst period of your life, 13 to 17, 18, 19. Like it can be a brutal time because there's just so many changes, so many desires. You're just getting used to perception of yourself and how you fit into things, trying to fit into things, not realizing that however it's playing out, you're going to learn things, you're going to go through stuff. It's inevitable that you're going to go through difficult experiences because it's a bunch of fucking little baby egos like interacting with each other. They don't know how to actually feel better about things. They're looking for the easiest, quickest cessation of whatever insecurity they have. And if that means, making fun of someone at school, like they're just going to go for that, not having any context as to what the actual impact is, like what it means about them more broadly, just expressing so much insecurity. So yeah, if you're going through that, and even it goes not just for teenage years, but for any situation that you're having a tough time, like there is no finality. There is no ends to any of it. Like as long as you keep going through, you'll keep going through, and life will continue to ebb and flow inevitably.
So I recently had the experience of taking the bus downtown from where I live during, I think it was the mid-afternoon. So school was just getting out. High school was just letting out. And so I was on the bus, and a bunch of high school kids got onto the bus. And normally it's not uncommon for me to be on the bus with a bunch of people. My daughter's normally there though. So I kind of, just focus on her and chat with her and do all that. But this time I was left just with the collective conversation that was happening around me. And so I decided to just listen. And it was a lot of, I did this. Yeah, well, I did more of that. Really? I've done more of that than anyone here. And then, oh yeah, a lot of that. Or this person said this about me. Yeah, a lot of people say that thing about me. Oh yeah, well, this person say this about me. And it's always just competition and comparison. And it's so interesting to listen to because there's so much of just like, yeah, well, I'm as much as you are. And then there's so much of that. And it's just because they're trying to figure out, who am I supposed to be where I'm going to have as much value as the person that I'm looking at? But the problem is that they're so desperate to feel like they know that every time they make an assumption about somebody, they actually think that is the person, right? So if they see somebody like that person's cool, all of a sudden they have all kinds of assumptions of that person and everything that person does in the wee hours of the evening by themselves, just being cool at home, like that kind of thing. And it's not true. Like the person is just as much a bonehead as anyone else. But again, that would mean that I don't know. And oh my God, that's uncomfortable too. And so as a teenager, I'm just running from this sense of discomfort that is inevitably just the state of affairs that is life, which is uncertainty. And the fact that your value can't be measured. And none of the games in your head, none of the people you're trying to be are really going to add anything to your life other than experience. And so it's really interesting to watch, but it's just this process of just going back and forth, looking for validation, trying to validate amongst other people who don't recognize that they are also trying to validate. And it's all done through comparison and assumption. And it's done so very loudly for no good reason other than the fact that they feel like nobody can hear them otherwise.
Yeah, it is very interesting to see. I almost forgot about that being a thing that happens so much. Like it just brings me right back to like elementary school, middle school, especially like, oh, even just like talking about someone in your life, like utilizing that, like, oh, your dad does this. Well, my dad's cooler because he does this. And oh, you think that's cool? Like, look at this. And it's all that, like, it's a insane game of trying to find something about yourself that you can settle upon. So it's no wonder that we think that we can find certainty when we're settling upon those things. Like all of those ideas, most of them being embellished ideas, and we think it actually means something about us, and that's the process. And then we never we don't really go beyond that to recognize that it isn't that. It doesn't mean what we think it means. Like it doesn't mean anything about us, the reality of what we are, but that's what we're building the entire time. And so it's just fascinating. And this actually makes me sort of think of an example of just this has been the other thing that's gone along with the uncertainty that I've been feeling like the last week, couple weeks, especially. And I think traveling helps with that just because it's so much hard. You're not in a set routine every single day. So it definitely makes it a lot easier, but it goes for myself too. And how I'm being perceived and my concern for being perceived in a certain way. And so the other night I went out with some friends. I have a good friend from work who lived in LA, and she had a group of friends. So I hung out with them a couple times, and there was a night we went out, and I'll share more of the details on this on Patreon. But basically, I did a bunch of different drugs, and I was just feeling like super high in different ways. I couldn't really point to which one it was. But it was just like that feeling of being really, really high and getting that feeling of like looking through Andrew's eyes and being super set back and just like, yeah, I'm here. I'm at the party. I'm hanging out and interacting with people just fine, but I'm not Andrew right now. I am like viewing it, and then it was like I was seeing that I was viewing through everyone else's eyes too, and I was relaxing through it, and because there was so little concern for how I was doing, can people tell that I'm high? I just didn't go into that thought process. Like, and in the past, I can think back because I know that feeling so well, that feeling of being like feeling really high. And it's so funny because I used to get that feeling and then I would get concerned. I would resist it. I would fight that feeling so quick. As soon as I started to feel it, I'd be like, I don't think I can handle this. I don't know. And there would have been a point a couple of years ago if I had felt that in that situation around a bunch of people that I had never met and like having the interactions and the conversations, I probably would have like left the party. It would have been because it can get so overwhelming. And it's so funny how much when you have the wherewithal, like not only faith in yourself, but just understanding that you don't know how it's going, just like that uncertainty right there is so interesting. And so even like knowing how undifferent Ray is when he smokes or does any sort of drugs, really, like he could be super high, like doesn't really act that differently. Like he's pretty much the same sober or really fucking high. And so I remembered that it doesn't have to make me so different. It can just be like net positive feeling like, yeah, I'm super high right now. And it doesn't really have to change so much. And whenever I tap into that, it's like I'm kind of brought back in. It's not, there's like so little concern. It's like, yeah, it doesn't change anything because I'm still me. There's just some drugs in my system and I'm feeling like a little more relaxed, a little more chill, just hanging out there. And so I think it all kind of goes hand in hand, but definitely that uncertainty of, the immediate conversation, other people's perception as I'm talking, where it's going, what it's leading to, just without all of that, without being able to settle upon even a false certainty of that, there's so much less concern and you can just kind of ride it all out, like really just ride out the experience. And it's just another experience. But yeah, it was funny to get that feeling of the really set back because it was the first time I gotten it in a couple weeks, and I'll get it sober plenty, but it there's a intensity of it when you're high that's just you don't really get when you're sober. So anyway, I wanted to that was like the one note I had to bring up. I had written down lots of drugs. And that was my note to remember. But it was a lot of fun for sure. And it's been cool kind of experiencing that in different ways.
That's awesome. And I'm just going to remind everyone that if you would like to have this kind of discussion with us, join us on Patreon, patreon.com/dualistic unity, where the conversations get way more weird and interesting and open and authentic. Because again, like even in this format, we do have to consider that anybody could be listening to this. And so we do want to caution anybody against irresponsible drug use, because of course, if you're going to use drugs, do so responsibly. Do everything responsibly. That's really what it's all about. It's just being responsible and aware, which is exactly what Andrew was just talking about, because it doesn't really matter what state you're in if you're willing to be responsible and exercise awareness, which usually means not react. Just don't react and you'll pick your way through pretty much every experience. That's it. That's all there is to it. Keep it light. It's funny how often I've been in experiences with people who were on one drug or another, and they were having one of those panic moments. And so they'd be asking like, yeah, but like, where are we going to go next? It's like, I don't know. That's okay. And that was often my answer was, that's okay. And usually very shortly after they'd be like, that's okay. It's like, yeah, it's okay. And it's just that light tone. They're like, it's okay. And then all of a sudden the whole experience changes for them because they don't try to have to know everything. Right? It's okay to not know. It's okay not to know what we're doing next or remember how we got here. It's okay. Everything's okay. It's gonna be okay. And that's it. That's life in a nutshell. It's gonna be okay. And it really will.
Yeah, it really is that shift, because that's the concern, the fear of uncertainty, the concern for what's going to happen next. And no one ever knows, but we like to think there are times where we like to think that we do. So then in the times where it really feels like we don't, that's when the anxiety comes in. That's when the fear, the overwhelming feeling of like, oh my God, I don't know anything. I don't know myself. I don't know, what's happening. I don't know what's coming next. Like, yeah, motherfucker, you never have. You've just made up a story that's convinced yourself to keep those feelings at bay, but you're just keeping freedom at bay. Really? So you've never known, you've never been able to settle upon an adequate idea of yourself that actually defines you. So you've never known yourself in an idealistic, conceptual way. You've never known what's going to happen. You've just convinced yourself that you could. So then when you're in that state of like sort of vulnerable, peeled back, feeling super high, it's like there's nothing to grasp anymore, because it's so much more clear how raw that uncertainty is, that it can come up like the thought of, oh my God, I don't know, only because you think that you could at one point, and only because you think that you should and that you need to, but you never have. And as soon as someone's like, and that's okay, you don't have to know. You don't know. You never have. And that's okay. It's like, oh yeah, it is okay. That is okay. Because that's relaxing into reality, freedom, all of those things. There is an experience that I don't think is super common in just recognizing how fucking raw uncertainty is. Like, you don't know anything right now. You don't know it. You're experiencing it. You are it. It's happening here and now, but you don't know it. You can't know it ever, because that's just a conceptual idea that isn't it. So we can utilize them, for communication, for whatever way that you want to, but without so much weight, because as soon as we take it more seriously than it is, or think that we do know, there's so many more repercussions. There's so many more consequences to that. So it's understanding just that you've never known, and that experience going through it's okay. It's okay to not know, because it's impossible to do so. Like, it's not even a consideration of like, well, maybe if I just think hard enough, if I just talk to that person who I think was judging me and find out what they thought, then it'll be okay. Then it'll be, if I just plan enough, if I just do my, pros and cons for long enough, if I just sit on this for long enough, then I'll know this decision. If I just think about it enough, then I'll know how it's going to turn out and where I'm going to go and what it's going to mean about me and all of those things. And it's never the case. All that time we spend mulling over things is time we don't spend living and experiencing it. And that's what's going to actually inform the decision, the experience, all of that. Like, it's all part of it. But you can sit on, you can sit there mulling over what to do for your entire life, or you can just do shit and find out and understand that here and now, your experience here and now has to always be the priority. If you're mulling over a situation, wondering where it's going to go, what it means about you, what the best decision to make is, you're not prioritizing your experience. You're not prioritizing your life. You're prioritizing some conceptual idea and trying to build that idea up enough and sacrificing your entire life. So it's a means of priority, I would say.
That's really what everything comes down to. At the end of the day, priority. We kind of went into this in the last Raw, and I know the conversation that we had on Patreon before that Raw, in terms of the difference between discipline and priority. Like, discipline is kind of this rigid structure that we create for ourselves because we think that we should be doing something, and that it means something to us to some degree, enough that we're going to force ourselves to do that thing over and over and over again. What I always find fascinating is that if you really, really think that thing's important, you'll find a way to do it. You'll find a way to do it as often as you can. And when you can't, that's okay, because you'll still be thinking, when I can, I'll do it, because it's a priority, which means that there's no real discipline required. Priority and enthusiasm, in fact, are kind of similar. If you look at it, I mean, you're just really into your priority, right? For no other reason than the priority itself. That's actually that's funny. The point is that it's just will. Huh.
So I'm curious about this because I was talking with someone a couple weeks ago, and they're in school and have a really tough time sitting down to study, basically. And so I'm curious your perspective on when you're doing something like school that's not, it's we do it thinking that it's what we should do, what we should be doing. And so I think there's a bigger picture there that you can look at. But at the time, it's like, you have a test on some, biology, and you're just not interested in biology, but you gotta study for it. So I'm curious how you balance that, because it's not necessarily a priority, but I guess it is based on the larger decision, but it's still something that I hesitate to even say should do, but like balancing that sort of feeling of having something that you feel like you should do, especially when it pertains to something like school, that's just this whole sort of societal construct that we've bought into, and you don't feel like doing it, like finding that, because a lot of people utilize discipline to do that. But do you think there's a way to implement priority into that?
This is a really good question. I love the way that you went in the first way. Like, I love the first direction that you went with this, which is that, okay, so maybe looking at the bigger picture, which is exactly what pretty much we always try to do. We go, okay, I hate this class. I don't want to do this test. This homework sucks. But if I don't do it, I'm not going to get the passing grade. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to graduate and get the job that I've been wanting. And then the job's going to lead me to such and such, and so on and so forth. And so there's this big picture now, giant, shiny carrot, right? And you think, oh, I should do it. That's a big fucking carrot and a sizable stick, because now I could fuck all that up, right? And that's exactly what we try to do. We try to do that. We go big picture. And sometimes that works. I never found it very effective. For a short term, it works, right? But then all of a sudden you start to kind of go, yeah, maybe that's beyond my reach. And you start to develop, this idea that you're not going to get your goal anyway, and your momentum starts to die a little bit faster. And it's just because the carrot's not enough, the stick's not enough. And at the end of the day, you just don't care. So I think that can help to some degree, but it's not enough on its own. I think that you have to actually go small picture. Like I think it really just has to come back down to, well, I'm in biology. This is where I am. I'm in biology. I'm in this phase of my schooling. Today is what's happening. I could be thinking about myself. I could be thinking about my future. I could be worried about what I'm going to do later. I could worry about everybody's expectations of how I'm going to graduate, or I could worry about my own thoughts about how I'm going to graduate. I could worry about the future. I could worry about the past. I could worry about all this stuff, what people perceive of me, how I'm going to do next year, what course I'm going to take, what job I'm going to have, how much I'm going to make, so on and so forth. Or I could just read the fucking page in front of me, because that's what's real here and now. And in doing so, take some enthusiastic interest in the fact that my life has actually allotted me time to learn about this thing. And by allotted me time, I mean I put myself here. Maybe I have a student loan. Either way, I'm in school. So why not take advantage of where I am? And that's the priority. The priority is not where it's getting you. The priority is not even doing the test so much as doing what's in front of you. It's just doing what's in front of you. See, to me, the priority in life is how much conflict am I creating for myself? My priority is not where I'm going. My priority is how to align with where I am. My priority is how to get the most out of what I am moment to moment to moment. But because of that, regardless of the work that I'm doing, I go wholeheartedly into it. Not because it means anything about me, not because it's getting me anywhere, but because it is the moment that I'm in. Right. And so that becomes my priority. And as a result, I get very good at the things that I do. Right. But it's not through any effort to get good at the things I do outside of for myself in this moment. Right. Like I mentioned before that I helped create a signage shop at one point in my past. And we had this giant, it was like 14-foot CNC machine. And for anybody who doesn't know what a CNC machine is, it's basically this giant rotating drill bit that cuts out signs and other shapes out of materials like, well, pretty much anything from foam to metal. And I didn't know how to do any of that. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And I started learning how to do that. And it became a whole business. But the point is that I was wholeheartedly in what I was doing. Why? Because it was fucking cool. Like, admittedly, as much as I was like, yeah, great, we're creating a sign job, I'm like, I've never done this. Look at this giant thing, and it was just, what can I design? And I came up with all kinds of weird designs because, of course, I had to test it out. I had to learn. I had to experiment with things, right? So backlit signs, really neat designs, all kinds of different fonts and shit. Why? Because it was cool and it was entertaining, regardless of the fact that it also paid my bills and it was a job and so on and so forth. Fact is if I was doing it as a way to like create a career for myself, for now I'm in the signage business and all that shit, there would have been so much frustration because obviously I'm not in the signage business anymore.
I feel like that enthusiasm for doing something despite it being a job is almost like rare these days. Like you explaining that, saying like, oh, it's a cool thing to do. Like it really is kind of rare for people to have a job where they're like, yeah, it's cool. I actually enjoy it. It's like people have the flip perspective. Like, yeah, it's a job. It makes me money, so I can do things that are actually cool, but that's still just a subjective opinion. So I feel like with any types of situations like that, there's a number of things in play, but even understanding that you could do anything in each moment, you look at things and you're able to see things a little bit more clearly, as opposed to thinking this is what I have to do and then sort of avoiding it. It's like you could do all these things. And there is a sense of, I especially felt this in school, where you have something, a test to study for, a paper to write or something, and you got to do that thing. And so it's always in the back of your head. It's always kind of sitting there. And so, yeah, you avoid it because you're like, I don't want to do that. And you go play video games for a couple hours. Like, you're not fully enjoying those video games. Or you go watch a movie or a TV show or do anything. you're not going to fully enjoy it because there's no way to escape it. It's kind of like, in manifestation, lying to yourself. It's like, yeah, you can say it all you want. You can say you have, $10 million, but you're just lying to yourself and you're just perpetuating this state of lack that you're feeling and you're trying to escape through then lying to yourself. So I think there is a component of that, but we get so caught in thinking that's what I have to do. That's what I need to do right now. But when you take a step back and almost come at it from the other point of view, like this isn't something I have to do, but I'm going to do it eventually. There's all these things that I could do. I could do anything right now. There's actually things about this that would be enjoyable to experience. It's a thing to experience. And without so much of a opinion about every fucking thing that you do, everything kind of becomes a little bit more neutral, just in the uncertainty, in the recognition that this is an experience I could have. Don't know what it's going to be like. Don't know what I'm going to learn from it. Don't know down the road where I'm going to be able to reference this or utilize this or whatever. It's like there isn't such a stark finality to our opinion of the thing anymore. And then there aren't these judgments that are attached to every experience, like studying, bad, boring, hate it, video games, fun, enjoyable, relaxing. It's like, no, they're both just experiences. You don't know what you're going to get out of them, what you're going to learn from them. And so without all of that objective opinion, like this is that, I have to do this, I shouldn't do this, there's so much more. It's like you can loosen up a little bit and look at things from such a clearer perspective. And then it kind of comes around full circle to seeing like, all right, I got to do this. I'm going to do it at some point. When I do it, it's going to be now. Might as well make it this now. And so I think there's just so many components that you can keep in mind when going through experiences like that, like recognizing the inevitability, relaxing into the uncertainty of the experience, seeing that there's things to learn from everything, even if it is studying for what you think is the most boring thing ever, there's still something to learn. You don't know what it's going to be like. And so I think all of those definitely help.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to mention to everybody who's in the comment section, yes, we're answering questions. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section, and we'll do our best to get to them as we go. We're here for like another hour or so, so feel free to jump in. But it's funny because this kind of reminds me of how I eat. And I know that sounds really funny, but when I eat, there's a certain degree of strategy that goes into this. And I don't know if you do this as well, but let's make this a priority. Let's just say that you, in fact, don't get a lot of time to eat, and that whenever you have a meal, it's important you eat that meal, like the whole meal, because of the nutrients and the fact that you need to continue on through life. So let's make that a priority, that you must eat the meal. The idea of wasting food is, in fact, stupid because you're setting yourself back. Let's just say. So you're going to make the most out of the meal that you're given. Okay. Now, what if that meal is split up amongst things that you really like, kind of like, and don't like at all? How are you going to eat that meal? Now, for me, and I know everybody who knows me knows this, I almost always eat the shit I don't like first. Almost always. Sometimes, especially if it's something I really don't like, I will kind of intersperse it in between bites of shit that I do like, just to mix it up and make it a little bit more palatable. Well, how is that any different than living? There's going to be things that you don't like eating. There are going to be things that you do like eating, but you have to eat it all. The whole point is the experience. The whole point is the entire plate, because it all enriches you. It all fulfills you. It all gives you sustenance to bring you to the next meal. And so you want to make the most of that, but you got to be strategic about this shit. Occasionally, doing your biology isn't necessarily a bad thing if it leads you to things in biology that you actually do enjoy. See, that's the funniest part about going through the shit you don't like, about learning something new, is that now you've learned something new, which means that you can see other things later. You've just opened up a whole new section of the plate with entirely different tastes and flavors, and you don't even recognize it. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to go and eat your way through the Brussels sprouts, as it were. Despite the fact that you don't like the Brussels sprouts, at least there's other things as well, but you are going to continue on to the next meal. And that's going to be an experience as well.
I do the same thing pretty much. Yeah. I always find it fascinating when people don't do it that way, when they're like eating what they really like first, and then they're just sitting there looking at the, bowl of, I don't know, beets or Brussels sprouts or broccoli or something. And I will say there's usually a way to cook certain things you don't like that will make them a little more palatable, not even like with crazy sauces necessarily, but just with some seasoning and whatnot and the way it's cooked. You don't have to eat the shitty stuff and make it super shitty. And there's ways even to mix it in to certain meals, like putting broccoli in like an omelet or something. But anyway, that's kind of besides the point and direction of this specific conversation, because it is funny how we see meals and food in that way and don't necessarily see life in that way. Because I think when someone gets caught in the conversation of priorities and what are you prioritizing, it can almost turn into a scapegoat, an excuse, a means of avoiding certain things that maybe you're not as enthusiastic about or passionate about. But so it's that understanding combined with uncertainty, combined with the letting go of your opinion of the situation. Like that is something to learn from in and of itself as well. So it's a multitude of factors at play. And I think letting go of your objective opinion doesn't mean that you're not going to have leanings towards certain things, but it isn't so stark of a opinion anymore. And so you're more willing to experience different things and understanding that a lot of times the things you thought you really wouldn't like, really wouldn't enjoy, we're afraid of doing, we're worried about doing, end up being things you really enjoy doing. And you could have put that off forever, but there was a number of things you then were able to learn from doing that thing. And so the more things like that you experience, the more willing I think you are to not just go towards the thing you always enjoy, because you can do that, all the time, but then you're not going to learn as much, because a lot of times the things we enjoy are the things that we're good at and the things we're more comfortable with. And so that's where that opinion comes from. And so through going through the things that maybe you don't really have a natural inclination towards, a lot of times that's just the stuff that you haven't done as much. And so you're not as good at it. And that's really a lot of where our opinions come from. Like when you're growing up, if you're good at certain sports and not as good at other sports, you're probably going to say the ones you're good at are your favorite sports to play. But you could probably learn a lot from the ones that you feel like you weren't as good at, including just humility too, like the willingness to step into a situation, because anytime you step into a new situation, you're not going to be amazing at it. But that's where you learn the most, like that first period of trying it, stepping into it, trying something new, failing a bunch. Like that's when the largest amount of learning and growth and experience actually happens, is in the first 100 tries, as opposed to once you've done it 1,000 times, those next 100, you're not going to learn nearly as much about yourself, about the situation. So once you get good at something, but that's what we attach to, because we're living in a world of concepts and in our idea of ourselves. And so everything is just a massive risk to that being diminished. And so because we're so afraid, we're like, yeah, I could try something new, but I'm good at this. And I don't want people to think of me in a certain way as a failure, or think of myself as a failure. But without that idea, there isn't so much fear of that anymore. And you're willing to step in, you're willing to prioritize your experience and make the most of that, because you're prioritizing you and your life. What's the point of fearing failure if you know that it's not going to mean anything about you? like as that concern for other people's judgments begins to be diminished, like that idea of failure isn't so relevant anymore. It's like, who's it for? Who are you really living for? The person who's going to think something about you, or who might think something about you that you'll never actually know for sure? Or are you going to prioritize you and your experience and the things that you're going through and what you're learning?
It's really interesting because we really do tend to think that learning is this process of somehow thinking about ourselves, right? We don't understand that just because we think about ourselves through the process of learning, that doesn't actually mean that we have to do that to the same degree, because it's true. Like, I could teach you anything. Like, we could take anything that you don't know and just start practicing it just a little bit at a time, expanding on what we understand about that thing a little bit more each and every day, and never once think about your progress. Never once judge whether or not you can do a thing in the future, whether something is beyond you or anything like that. Just step by step, as you're comfortable, expanding upon what you know, as it becomes familiar, expanding a little bit upon that, just for the sake of seeing where it goes. That's learning. And we do that all the time. You know, it's interesting because there's this great study, I don't know what you call it, but basically they took a bunch of chimpanzees and they put them in front of a screen, and on that screen they would flash the numbers 1 to 9 in different order, always constantly in different orders, but they would literally just flash it on the screen, just, and it was gone. And the chimp, without even batting an eye, would just go 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, with the numbers not there anymore, perfectly, and just do it over and over and over and over again. And whenever it made a mistake, which was rare, it would just reset it and do it again. There would be no emotional upset. It would be no reaction to getting it wrong. It was just, oh, that didn't happen. Next. And then it would do it right. But that's the focus that we're talking about, right? There's intelligence in play. There's intelligence in action right there. How many humans do you think could do that without forgetting what the numbers on the screen were? Do you think they're forgetting what the numbers on the screen were? Or do you think that all of a sudden they're thinking about their progress? And that's cutting off the flow of intelligence, which would have otherwise been making it easier for them to remember. Because that's the thing, we're always in our own way. How often are we learning something and then go, oh man, this is really hard. I don't know if I get this. And we've totally lost our train of thought. So are we as advanced as we think we are, or have we totally forgotten what intelligence is?
It really is, like, that's what it comes down to. Your idea of yourself hinders intelligence from being expressed. Like, without that, it just always is that. And it doesn't mean that it's always going to, perform, quote unquote, perform super well. Like the chimpanzee, they still made some mistakes. It was just, there was zero concern for what it meant. It wasn't, so it's not even considered a mistake. It's just something that happened. And then the remembering of it was also something that happened. It wasn't this success failure, because as soon as those come in, it means something about you. I succeeded or I failed. And so it's always just our idea of ourselves that's getting in the way of intelligence being expressed. Because even on the side of the positive idea of yourself, that's still going to be hindering your ability to explore other things, because no matter what, there's going to be that fear and concern. Even if you get good at something, and that's an aspect of your positive idea of yourself, there's going to be more concern for stepping into other situations that you don't feel as good at. And that's why you see people who get really good at something, they don't usually venture into completely uncharted territory, because it's the idea of themselves. There's a lot at risk right here. They've built this one pretty high up. They can't risk that being diminished. They would lose everything because they think it actually exists. Like, they think it's actually a real thing, that idea of ourselves. We actually think that it's something that we can point to and sit on and express and maintain and compare our idea to someone else's. We're just comparing made up bullshit. We're comparing illusions. We're comparing things that don't actually exist in reality, just conceptual frameworks, and none of them are the same for any of us, about anyone else, about ourselves. So it's all different. I think we talked about this a month or two ago, just how we have this idea, say, of ourselves. That idea is completely different for everybody else. We think that there's some objectivity to these concepts, to these ideas. My idea of that person, your idea of that person, they're probably pretty similar. They're not. They're not the same at all. They're completely different. And yet we think there is some semblance of the same. But when you see that, like every person has a different idea of every other person. So it's all singular ideas of each person that exists inside of your mind. It's all your mind. So that's going to dictate your experience. And so we're comparing these with each other, and we're comparing apples and oranges every single time we compare or judge someone or think that, like, it's so funny because we really do think there is some overlap. There is some overlap to our concepts, to our ideas of anything, really. Even, this coffee mug. Everyone has an idea of a coffee mug. None of them are objectively exactly the same. It's all going to be tiny little, even if it's just a tiny little difference, none of them are going to be the same based on our opinion of coffee, our experience with coffee mugs. Like, I know this seems like a silly example, but it is so true. And the more complex that things get, going from a coffee mug to, say, a computer to a dog to a human being, like the more complex it is, the less overlap there's going to be for that idea. So coffee cup, maybe there's a decent amount of overlap. None of the ideas are going to be the same. And then with humans, there's going to be maybe a tiny bit of overlap, but it's going to be way less, way lower of a percentage than a coffee mug or a computer or a dog or anything like that. And yet we think there's actually, it's fully overlapped, our idea of things and everyone else's, but it isn't. It never is. Like, it's funny that it's something that isn't super obvious, but it isn't. We really do think that our ideas of ourselves are the same as everyone else's idea of ourselves. Our opinion of other people, our ideas of other people are the same. And they're not. Like, they're not even close to fully overlapping. There's some tiny little overlaps, but that's it. It is not objective by any means. And through recognizing that, there's so much less concern for that idea, because you know that every single idea is only you settling upon a certainty that doesn't actually exist.
For convenience, more than anything. I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying about the coffee cup. Like, there's a lot that somebody could learn about your coffee cup. Like, there's people out there, for example, who would be able to have an opinion on the kind of ceramic that coffee cup is made of, and how it was fired in a kiln, and who manufactured it, or different sizes, and what era that size became popular as a kind of coffee cup, because there's a history to cups, right? And then there's a history of ceramics, and there's a history of cylindrical containers throughout time, and there are experts in this. Like, for God's sake, there are people out there, I shit you not, who get paid thousands of dollars for their sense of smell. That's it, for their sense of smell. They will take a scent and be able to tell you exactly what that is, what year, the whole thing. Like, they are experts in terms of their sense of smell, and they are hired and paid by perfume companies and a lot of other different types of industries because of that sense of smell. Like, that is a finely developed sense. I mean, how rare is that in terms of knowledge? And that person would have a damn different perspective of pretty much anything you gave them. Anything. You could be like, oh, would you like some cashews? And they would tell you what region it's from and who grew it, things like that. Like, you'd be like, I just thought they were cashews. Right. And that just goes to show you, like, and this is the reason that context and experience is so important. It changes everything. You can learn a certain amount of things and then go and have an experience and go, I loved that experience. And then come back to that experience 5 years later as a different person and enjoy that experience again, but as a different person. Like, that's incredible. That is incredible. If you just continue to widen your context, you're always widening your life. You're always expanding yourself. That's why experience is so important. That's why it's so important to question things, right? Because then you grow. You see more of you. You see more of what you're capable of. You see more of what you can see. which is really cool.
Yeah, even because this reminds me of a video I posted maybe 2 weeks ago about how shitty it would be if everything was certain. Like if you knew exactly how every single day was going to go before it went, every intricate detail, every situation that you go through, every opinion that everyone had of every situation that you interacted with. And I got some comments like, this is my life. I do know how every day is going to go exactly. And it's so boring. Like, thanks 9 to 5 corporate America for allowing this to happen. And that's discounting you. As you just said, you can go through the same situation a million times every single day, back to back to back to back to back. And they're all going to be different because you're different. We discount that. And I think that's because we maintain an idea of ourselves. And so we go into work every day or do whatever every day. And we think we're doing the same thing over and over and over because we're maintaining the same idea of ourselves and clinging to that false certainty. But the reality is that we're different every single time we go through it. So sure, every Monday, maybe you get up, get a coffee, drive to work, go to work, say hi to that person, sit down at your desk, do all those things. But the only reason you think it's the same exact experience every single time is because you think that you're not changing in each and every moment. You discount the fact that you are change every single day. And so all of those experiences, as much as we can label them as, oh, it's basically the same thing, so tedious, so monotonous, my life's so boring, we're discounting how much influence we have. Like there's a whole component to the situation being you that's changing, that's having impact on that situation. You are an element of that situation, of that experience that you're going through. So we discount that. And so through recognizing that we can't be certain about ourselves ever, every situation, even the ones that we feel like are repeating every day, is new and different. And when you're actually paying attention to it, when you're actually there for it, not caught up in thinking what's going to happen later in the day or next week or what this thing is going to mean about you next month or how it's going to lead you to a promotion, your attention is where you're at. And then you can see the uniqueness in each and every moment. But I think we get so caught in concepts and trying to find that certainty that we don't realize how different and new every experience could possibly be because we're not actually paying attention to the experience. We've created a conceptual idea of what that experience is, our opinion of it. It's like, I have this job, I don't like this job, and now I have to maintain this opinion of it, despite it possibly getting better or having the opportunity to improve if we just stopped settling upon this certainty. So understanding how different each and every situation is, it almost informs itself. It's like a give and take. Through recognizing that, you'll be more attentive to the situation because you're like, this is a brand new experience each and every time you go through it. And then because you're paying attention, you'll realize how brand new of an experience that it is. And then you'll pay more attention to it. You'll realize how new it is, pay more attention to it. And then it's like this vicious cycle in the other direction, the other side of the spectrum that you've been going away from for your entire life because you're not paying attention and you're settling upon the idea that it's the same thing. And so you're not paying attention, settling upon an idea that gives you less incentive to pay attention. And it's like, you can go that way or you can go the other way. And that really comes down to you and your priority.
That's really interesting because it really does come down to whether or not you're prioritizing your life, your existence, and what that means, right? Because it's interesting. In the here and now, despite not going anywhere, we're always kind of going somewhere. And the only question is how or why. And so this is why often I've said, like, if you're not talking to your brain, it's talking to you. Right. And it's usually not saying anything other than we're good here. Don't move, don't change, don't question. Just nobody moves, nobody dies, that kind of thing. But if you're talking to your brain, then you're like, right, but there's more to life. You know, there are things maybe we're not seeing. There are ways that we can grow, some strength that we can gain, and things like that. And your brain, you know, doesn't tend to default to that because it's just trying to keep you comfortable and safe and not dead. Because everything that we do in terms of growth also entails some risk. And so the brain doesn't like it. Right. ever. There's always some risk in changing who you are and the comfort that goes with that and the familiarity and all that. All of a sudden, you're going into the unknown every time you change, and the brain doesn't like that at all because there's that uncertainty again. So there's this whole loop, excuse me, that we do. And it's important to willingly do that loop to some degree. And so what I mean is we have a question here. Ever since I left spirituality and not doing any spiritual practices, I lost a sense of comfort that I used to have. Any thoughts? And I want to make it very clear that what was the purpose of the spiritual practices outside of coming to prioritize your own existence? Like in doing these spiritual practices, what are you doing? You're saying, my existence is my own. I want to align with it. I want to be free, right? I want to get out of my own way. All of that stuff. Tired of suffering, tired of going through the egotistical crap. Okay, so the reason those spiritual practices offer some degree of comfort is because they give you some sense of control. They give you some sense of control that you are, in fact, going in that direction, becoming that person. But they also create an idea of the person that you're going to become. And that's the danger of them. And so we walk away from the spiritual practices. But you see, the comfort was with the familiarity. The comfort is your brain going, aha, I know who I am and I know who I'm becoming now, which means that it's getting in your way. So rather than trying to get back to that comfort, try to put it in perspective. Recognize that that's the case. And then take comfort in the fact that you are gaining strength right now by not being comfortable. That you are in fact growing. You're doing exactly what it is you wanted to do. It's just not what you thought it was, because it never is. Relying on these things for some sense of comfort takes away from your faith in yourself. It takes away from the recognition that you don't need them. That's all. And there's nothing wrong with doing them by any means. And if you want to do spiritual practices, go ahead. But as I said, just because you can use a crutch doesn't mean you need to. Right. But take comfort in that. Like, there's a lot of comfort in using a crutch. You're like, yeah, I only have to carry half the weight. This is really quite nice, right? To some degree, but you lose the mobility of being able to walk. So where's your comfort coming from? Is it coming from the familiar, or is it coming from your expanding sense of freedom and ability?
Exactly. Because freedom and uncertainty go hand in hand. It's almost like, this for this example specifically, if you've gotten comfortable with doing some spiritual practices, now you're not doing it anymore, and now you're kind of uncertain, not able to settle upon that certainty and the comfort that comes with it and how you fit into each and every situation. It's kind of comparable to like traveling and going. Previously, you were holding on to, the spiritual practices and whatnot, and you're traveling to basically the same place every single time. Getting on a plane, you had your bags packed the same luggage every time, going to the same location every single time. And it's cool, but it's limited. You've kind of done it a bunch, and say you have a whole itinerary while you're there. So you pretty much know what you're going to do, who you're going to see. There's not much variability in your experience. And so you do that for a while. So you do that for a year. Every couple of weeks, you go on that same exact trip. Eventually, you're like, all right, I know this. I want to experience something new, something a little more uncertain. And so letting go of those practices, of that certainty, is like going and maybe not packing any bags, packing less, and kind of getting on a plane and not knowing where you're going to go, and just finding out once you get there, which forces you to prioritize each and every moment. It's not this thing that you can have this idea of where it's going to go and just checking the boxes of, all right, I'm going on this trip because I want to feel better about myself, or feel more relaxed. And so there's all these expectations going into it, where if you just get on a plane, you're like, all right, I'm going to go here. And you just go there and you get off the plane, don't have anything booked yet, not planning on doing anything. That can be scary, or it can be super fucking exciting, especially when you're used to doing the same thing, going on the same trip over and over and over and over again. It's like, sure, there's still technically, you're on vacation, you're doing the whole thing, you don't have as much responsibility, but it's obvious in that example how quickly you'll get comfortable with that and want a new experience, but you can't have that new experience, that state of real freedom, without having the uncertainty. You can't both be certain about how your day is going to go, where it's going to lead, where you're going to go, where you're going to stay, and have all of that freedom. The more certainty, the more control you attempt to implement into the situation, the less freedom you have. You're always taking from freedom every time you settle upon a certainty, or plan something in advance and try and plan everything out and know exactly how things are going to go. You're never actually going to know, but there is a sort of ability to limit your own freedom through prioritizing that desire for certainty and control, but you can't have both. So it comes down to you. If you want to go back to the spiritual practices and the false comfort that comes with that, like, feel free. You can go back to them, but you're sacrificing your freedom. You are sacrificing that freedom. And that freedom is like traveling without packing so many bags, or knowing where you're going to stay, or who you're going to interact with, or how your day is going to go. Like, yeah, it can be uncomfortable at first, until you realize how fucking exciting that is, until you realize how cool it is to be able to do that, to have that experience and just find out. And then, as I was saying, it forces you to prioritize the moment that you're in, because there isn't any idea of where it's going. You don't have preset plans. So the only option is to be attentive to where you're at. And that's your life. No matter how many plans you make, if you're not attentive to where you're at, you're not prioritizing your life. You're prioritizing the situation and what it means. And so letting go of that, stepping into each and every moment, not knowing where it's going to go or where it's going to lead to, you can't not prioritize the experience that you're having present moment. And so, the more you plan, the more preset things you have, the more meditation routines or, morning routines you cling to, or any type of routine specifically, it's limiting your freedom. It's taking little bits away from it each and every time. So again, comes down to your priority. Nothing wrong with having a bunch of routines, a bunch of things like that, but the discomfort that you feel when you let that go is investing more into the potential freedom that you can experience, because that uncertainty and freedom go hand in hand. And that uncertainty can be uncomfortable at first when you're used to thinking that you can know, when you're used to planning and having preset ideas of how things are going to go. That uncertainty will be uncomfortable at first, but that's stepping into that freedom.
And that is just really learning how to balance all of that. Because that's it. Like we say, embrace uncertainty and all that, but you're still like, right, but I gotta arrange like plane tickets and shit. And it's like, yeah, that's true. There's a balance, as with everything. And this is something that it's important to keep in mind, that there is no one thing that you must do. Like, you must not always be present. You must not always be in control, that kind of thing. There's a balance. And so what I mean is that, well, okay, so perfect example. We have the Colorado trip coming up. June 9th, I'm going to be in Denver until June 19th. That's most of what I know about what's going to happen in Colorado. I know that we have locations already booked, so there was some planning there. I don't know what we're going to do during those stays. I have no idea what I'm going to do in between, when because we got a mini retreat and then a mini retreat, and then I've got like 3 days in between where I'm just going to be fucking around Denver, which is going to be great. But I have no idea what's in Denver, and I have no intention of going to look either, because that would ruin it for me. Frankly, that would just fucking ruin it, because I understand, like, I can go to a city and not know what the fuck I'm doing and figure it out. I've done it numerous times in my life. And so there's a certain degree of planning, because you can't just show up at an airport and say, I'd like to get on a plane, please. Right? That'd be nice, but you can't. So there's a certain degree of planning that goes into that. You want to know maybe where you're staying. Do you have to know where you're staying? No, not at all. You can just fly somewhere and find a place to stay. You really can do that. And it's having, again, the understanding that you can do that. Because really the biggest part is the fear. Well, how would I do that? You'd figure it out. You really would. So often we get in our way and we're just like, oh, I don't know if I could, how would I stop that? Like, just try and work it out one step at a time. Like, just stop, settle down. What's the first conceivable thing that you can understand to do next? And then that will lead you to another thing, which will lead you to another thing. And this is the process of learning. right? But if we don't immediately have a linear projection of point A to point Z in our head, we freak out. Like, Jesus, what's going to happen at B or C? It's like, you'll find out when you get there. This is an important lesson. It really is. At the end of the day, like, all you can do is what you can do. So you could have your entire trip planned. You could decide when you're going to land, when the cab's going to pick you up, where it's going to bring you, what you're going to do the next morning, what you're going to do that afternoon, what you're going to do that evening, what you're going to do the morning after that, where you're going to stay, how you're going to travel, where you're going to meet, where you're going to have dinner, blah, 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 blah. Boom, your plane's fucking late. None of it happens. Cab doesn't show up or gets a flat tire, right? Friends can't make it. Maybe somebody's got COVID. The whole point is that you never had control. That linear projection in your head doesn't fucking exist. It doesn't exist in reality. It would be nice. It would be great if it all worked out that way, and occasionally it does. As anybody who's ever laid up dominoes knows, you can get them in a straight line, so they do what they're supposed to do. But that doesn't mean they always fall the way they want, that you want them to. Like, that's the whole point. Life is very variable. So it's just being willing to recognize that you can have influence. You can try to contemplate what you might be dealing with in the future. You don't know. You don't know. The more experience you have, the more you're going to recognize that you don't know. And that's going to make you consider even more things. And that's the process of learning as a whole. But again, part of that is just jumping in and accepting that you're never going to know. You're just never going to know. And that's important. But that all said, again, you can try and occasionally throw shit out there like this right here, right now. I'm going to throw this out. There's no details as yet, because of course this is something that Patreon members are going to know. June 14th, I'm going to be in Denver. June 14th is a Wednesday. And as anybody knows, who knows me, I fucking love karaoke. I really do. I really enjoy karaoke. Now, there's no retreats happening on June 14th. It's just a Wednesday with me fucking around in Denver. So on that day, on Patreon, we're going to tell you where I am doing karaoke with Andrew. And if you're in the area, you should join us. Now, I say all that like it's a done deal. Do I know it's a done deal? No, it may not happen at all. But just so you know, I have looked up karaoke places. There is a couple of places on Wednesday. So, that's out there now. It's totally possible. On June 14th, you could be doing karaoke with us at a bar in Denver. Is that a guarantee? No, it's not. But if you would like to know the details as we get closer, join us on Patreon.
Amen. And it's so interesting how we like to think that we know how things are going to work out and how they're going to play out, and we never do, but we convince ourselves that we could. And almost all the most fun experiences that I've had have been that kind of spur of the moment decision. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, where this is going to go, but let's find out. And it really is that balance. Like, for example, even me, so going from LA to San Diego. So I had Airbnb in both, had to check out of my LA place by yesterday morning at 10, and then check in. I couldn't check into this place till 3. So 2 nights ago, I was it was probably like 4 in the afternoon, and I was like, I'm probably just gonna have an early night, get up early, and leave Venice, and maybe meet up with a friend while I'm waiting for my San Diego place. And then was talking to one of my friends who lives about an hour south of LA, which is almost halfway between San Diego. And I was like, we were talking about what he was up to that night, and he was going out meeting up with some friends. This was Saturday night, had to be out of Venice by LA by Sunday morning. And I was like, you know what I could do? I could just leave now, check out, pack up, meet up with you guys, and then I can just hang during the day with you guys and then get to San Diego. So yes, there was the balance of having a place and having another place, but everything in between, all that stuff is completely up for debate. It's up to find out. And so, yeah, I was like, fuck it. And so I just packed up all my shit in like an hour and just drove down there and showed up, met up with his friends that I had never met before, and we had a great night and hung out, and it was a good time. And it was if I was so rigid in thinking, I already had this plan, gotta stay here, check out at this point and then get there. It's like in my head, that was kind of loose plan I had for the week coming up to that point. And then the day came and it was like, all right, here's something I could do, and I can do this. And it's just stepping into that. It was going out in a place I had never been and with people that I didn't know. And let's find out, see how it goes. And it was a ton of fun. But so it really is. And I think that's an important point to get across, that balance of, you don't have to, it's not that everything has to be so uncertain, unplanned, because I think people, like with a lot of the things we talk about, they'll take it to this extreme and think, oh, so planning's bad. So then how do I do anything? How do I even plan for anything? So I should just show up to the airport and buy a flight ticket and then leave and not even know where I'm going. It's like, no, you don't have to do that. You can plan, and when you plan for something, you're focused on the planning, but you're not so caught in thinking that you know exactly how it's going to go. It's like creating some semblance of a very loose structure of the things, of like, the location that you'll be in and how you're getting there. But in terms of the actual experience that you have there, which is like the other 99% of it, you don't have to have a set plan for that. And then when you do, also, you don't have to get so caught in thinking that that is how it's going to be. Like, there were people, I was able to meet up with a decent amount of people, but there was a bunch of people that, I wanted to meet up with and wasn't able to, or had, we had some plans and then they texted me last minute and like, hey man, so sorry, like something came up, blah, blah, blah. And they would apologize. And I just feel like there would be no feeling of, oh man, does this mean, do they maybe not like me? Like, is that why they're not doing this? Like, they're prioritizing this over hanging with me. I haven't seen them in so long. Like, those are all things that people go through when they're living their life. And it's just so unnecessary. Like, you don't know why they had to do that or what it's going through. And most likely 99% of the time, it has zero to do with you whatsoever. And it's actually quite egotistical to think that everyone who changes plans and isn't able to meet up with you, or, wants to meet up with you or whatever, is all about you. Like, you don't think that they're prioritizing their own life? You think they're thinking about you for more than like 2 minutes a day when they're responding to you? It's like, no, they have their own entire situation that they're going through. They're not spending time thinking about how you're spending your day or what you may be concerned about if they change their plans and whatnot. It's just, things happen. Things are playing out. You don't know what they're leading to. You don't know what they mean. You don't know what anything means about you ever. And so just being willing to be attentive to where you're at and let go of the idea and the concern for how things are playing out, as if you could ever possibly know how they're playing out or what they mean about you.
But that's it, right? Like, it's that feeling of uncertainty. Like, everything that you just said on the surface sounds really good, and on the surface sounds really bad at the same token, right? It's like, what do you mean? I don't know. I can't know. Worse. What do you mean they're not thinking about me? Does that mean I'm not important? Why isn't anybody thinking about me? Like, there's all this stuff that goes with that. And that's it, right? Like, the less you prioritize your own life, the more you require other people to prioritize your life. And that's unfortunately the case. Like, we keep expecting other people to be judging us and thinking about us and validating us and doing all this stuff because, frankly, we're not doing it ourselves. We're not going through any of that stuff in ourselves. We're not talking to ourselves. We're just taking whatever the brain's spitting out at us, and we're just going, oh, fuck, that's reality. Oh my God. And it's like, no, you actually get to decide what you do with that flow of shit. Like, you actually get to decide how you're going to take it, what you're going to do with it, whether you're going to pay attention to it, whether you're going to resist it, whether you're going to run from it, what your preferences about it are, all that shit. Or you could just take it in and learn and grow and change. Right. And it's funny to me because I can clearly remember numerous times in my life where this has been the case, where I've just been either sitting on some cement step or sitting on the curb of a street or something, hanging my head, fucking staring at my feet, watching some asshole ant just kind of scurry around my shoe or whatever, with this fucking feeling like, fuck, I don't know what I'm doing. Jesus Christ, my life's going to shit. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what this person thinks about me. I think I've lost this friendship or I've lost my job or something. It's just that sad, dejected fucking space that you're in where you're just kind of like, and you're just left with yourself in this moment here and now. I used to hate those experiences. I really didn't like those moments at all. You know, I really cherish those moments. I love those little fucking ants that just happen to be there at those moments. It's like, great, thank you for doing something other than worrying about me, because at least they're reminding me that life goes on without me, right? But it's just that, it's those uncomfortable moments where we're just like, oh God, what do I do? And we can't stop thinking about ourselves when we could just watch the ant or get up and go for a walk. But instead, we're sitting there sad, dejected, desperate to find some idea of where the hell we're going to go from here. And we never know. We never know, even if we convince ourselves we know. We have this unfortunate habit of deciding to map out our entire trajectory. It's like, oh, what am I going to do for a job? And it starts early. You know, it starts early. What do you want to do for a job, Timmy? What do you want to be when you grow up? It's like, Jesus Christ, I don't even know what grown up means. And you want me to figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? You know, and there's some certainty in that. We're like, yeah, okay, figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. That sounds really good, because then I know I don't have to think about it anymore, right? It's a pretty clean cut trajectory. So it's so tempting, but so limiting and so imprisoning, because you shouldn't be thinking about what do you want to do for the rest of your life. You should be thinking, what do you want to do next? Just what do you want to do next? And then if you decide to change, you can change. But how often do we do that? How often do we get into a job? We work at that job. We decide this is the job I want. We progress in the job. 5 years goes by. Maybe we've had a couple of raises or a promotion, but we've decided, I don't know if I really enjoy this job so much. Well, I can't just leave. Why? Why? Did something happen where you can't do the exact same goddamn process you just did with this job? Has something changed about your potential? No, you've just gotten comfortable with what's familiar, and what's familiar is addictive because it's familiar. But your potential hasn't changed. You could get up, go to your boss's office and say, you know, I'm sorry, I'm not feeling this anymore. So I'm going to give you a month and then I'm going to leave. You can do that. You can absolutely, now immediately you're going to go, well, yeah, well, what am I going to do? Where am I going to get a job? Where am I going to live? How am I going to pay my rent? Figure it out. The point is that figure it out from an entirely new perspective of somebody who doesn't have that fucking job. That's how you feel different. That's how you experience something different, by changing something. That's it. But you tell yourself you can't. You tell yourself it's a bad idea. You tell yourself there's some great risk in doing so. There is a great risk in leaving your house. There's a great risk in getting up and going into your kitchen. How many deaths in the house happen on a set of stairs or in the bathroom? There's a great risk in existing. Is that a good enough excuse for you to just sit there and wallow in self-pity and misery because you feel like it'd be a stupid move for you to change and be uncertain? That's where you discover how much you are. That's where you start to feel alive. So if you're not feeling alive, you can change that by just changing something, by making yourself uncertain and uncomfortable and seeing your way through it. But most of the time, we just reach for something that's familiar. We just take what we've done and the fact that we've somehow gotten good at doing it up until now, and we forget. We can do that with anything. We can do that with everything. You can go from being a dental hygienist to a goddamn spelunker. You want to learn how to spelunk? You go learn how to spelunk. And all of a sudden you're caving. Did you know you could do that? No, because you didn't leave the dentist office.
And we always maintain this perspective that we have to solve the issue before taking any action. Like the example you were expressing, sitting there, you know, feeling dejected, thinking about your life and how you fit into everything, not knowing where you're going or what anything means about you. And we think we have to find a cessation of that before we can do anything. We're like, all right, I got to just fix this perception. Let's figure out a way to feel better about ourselves. And then we can go step back into reality. And that's almost always the path that people think you have to take when they're in that state of feeling down. They're like, all right, going to figure out why, going to solve that, going to settle on that certainty, and then everything will be good. And then I'll be able to continue living my life. Like, you're still living your life. There's no pause button on life. There's no way to be like, all right, I'm gonna fix this, and then I'm gonna go keep living. Like, actually living it is the thing that allows for that to naturally subside. Like, how many times do we get caught in our own head doing some shit, and then we just go do some stuff, and then we're like, oh, remember when I was taking that super seriously? Like, you don't have to solve it yourself. Problems of the mind can't be solved at the level of the mind. That whole, was that Einstein that said that? Yeah. And but that's what we think we can do. We think that that idea in our head, that idea of ourselves, can be solved by finding a better idea of ourselves or finding a reason. Even that, like, finding an excuse as to, okay, so this person thought of me like this. And then we come up with a reason like, oh, but they're an asshole. And people think of them this way. And people think that they're not a nice person. So like, and then that makes you feel a little bit better about their thoughts about you. And then you're like, okay, now I feel okay. Now I can go out and live. You can feel shitty and still and still live. Like, you can feel that sitting on the step, thinking about yourself, caught up in shit, and still go do shit, still go interact with people, still go to a coffee shop and order a coffee, go on a walk, whatever. And you'll find that as you start just doing more things and experiencing more things, it's just the idea in your head that you're maintaining that's hindering you from seeing beyond that. Like, that experience is existing inside of your mind based on the concept of yourself, based on the idea of yourself that doesn't actually exist in reality. It just exists in ideas and concepts. So you can make moves, you can take action no matter how you're feeling, no matter what you're going through. You don't have to solve that feeling because it can't be solved. It's going to naturally subside eventually. Whether you sit there on the stoop for 10 hours or you sit there for 5 more minutes and then like, all right, fuck it, I'm going to go do something. Then you go on a walk. Like, there's so many times for myself in the morning where I'm like going through my routine, brushing my teeth, whatever, drinking some water, making some coffee. And I have all these fucking thoughts, all this dumb shit. I'm just like, my brain's processing stuff and I'm just paying attention to it. And I'm like, oh man, going through whatever insecurities. And then I'm like, all right, I could keep doing this, or I could go on a walk. And then I go on a walk and I'm like looking around, kind of involved in the experience. And it just hits you how much it's you maintaining that idea. As your attention goes to other things, as you begin focusing, as you start giving, your priority to the experience that you're having, the walk that you're on, looking around, experiencing, watching a bird fly by, looking at a tree, the wind blow the leaves of the tree, something. You start getting involved in that experience, you'll see how it's not something that you have to think your way through to solve. It's just, you're thinking about yourself a bunch and you're caught in it. It's not a loop that you're going to get out of by continuing to think about it. You're not going to think your way out of that experience. Just go do some shit. Find out. Step into discomfort. And that's the funny part too, is like stepping into an uncomfortable situation or a new situation. You're kind of stuck in that state of uncertainty. So it's very difficult to settle upon that idea that you were mulling over for so long. And it kind of forces you out of it. And you'll realize after a few hours, oh, I was just thinking about myself, trying to find a certainty, trying to cling to some idea of control, what something means about me, where something's going. It's not necessary. So you start living your life and prioritizing that experience, that idea, and all of the concerns that came with that you thought were so serious weren't. You're not going to fix it by sitting there thinking your way through it. Just get out there and keep living, and you'll realize how unsolid, how uncertain or solid or whatever you want to say that idea was. It's just an idea that you're maintaining that is never the truth of what you are. And the more clearly you can recognize that you can't even settle upon any certainty or idea of yourself, the more you're going to be willing to step into new things, because you can't find that certainty. You can't know yourself. So that definitely helps when you're getting caught in that, is realizing there's no end to this until I decide to stop.
And it's funny, this ties into a question, actually. Since we make decisions actively, how do we make decisions in a way that our ego isn't driving them? And there's so much to this question, in a lot of ways, not just the fact that any decision that you make, of course, any direction that you do choose is part of the whole, right? So it may not actually be your ego necessarily driving it. But I do want to point out, and this is really important, there isn't a direction that you're going to take. There isn't a single journey that you're going to go on in life that is not a potential ego trip. Doesn't matter what it is. As soon as you start something, there's the ability to beat yourself up, judge yourself, boost yourself up, try and be better than others, compare your value based on where you are in the progression of that journey. Doesn't matter what it is. You understand? Doesn't matter if you take up sculpting, if you take up learning how to fly an airplane, doesn't matter if you take up advanced math. It is a potential ego trip as you go from being an amateur to mastery. Because in mastery, you can take yourself super seriously. And that's the lesson, is to not do that. Because then you're trapped in that ego trip rather than doing the full circle, pulling everything that you can out of it, not just in terms of learning about the thing, but learning about yourself. And then taking another journey where perhaps you don't get so caught up in your ego. But there isn't a journey you're going to go on that isn't somehow derived from the experience that you're having, right? Which is the perception of division. Understand, without the perception of division, without the ego, there's no such thing as a journey, right? So they're the same thing. So it's not about making a decision without your ego. It's about making a decision considering your ego and its superficial needs. Understanding that journey that my ego wants to go towards is based on the fact that I don't feel like enough in myself. Okay, maybe I'm not going to entertain that thought. Maybe I'm not going to go for this thing that makes me suddenly more valuable in the eyes of others. Maybe there's something that I'm interested in based on some passing experience in the past, or some ongoing enthusiasm for the topic. Maybe there's something that isn't going to reflect on my value whatsoever. People aren't going to give a shit if I'm doing it, and has nothing to do with accolades or respect or recognition whatsoever. So it's still derived from my experience of being divided from the universe, but it does not go towards the general ambition of becoming more than I am, more complete, more valuable in comparison to assumptions of others. So it's not about necessarily avoiding the ego so much as, again, considering it. Considering when you are fanning the flames as opposed to just enjoying the fire.
Yeah, I really do think it comes down to how much you think the experience means about you, and the outcome of the experience means about you. Like, you can make decisions, and as Ray said, it's important to recognize where certain thought patterns and decisions are stemming from. Like, are they stemming from believing your idea of yourself to be the truth and the needs you perceive yourself to have that may not be so, that really are just wants that you think you need because you feel like you lack in yourself? But as soon as the outcome of a situation, whatever it may be, means something about you, it's going to hinder your ability to fully experience that thing, because there's an ulterior motive. There is a fear of being diminished and a desire to become more. When you realize that none of those are even a possibility, it's impossible to experience either. You can just step into the situation, because that's what hinders us from making certain decisions usually that maybe we would want to make. We want to try something new, and we're like, oh, but there's a lot at risk. There's a lot at stake here. There's an entire me. I am at stake. I am fully at stake in every situation that I go through, as long as you are believing that that idea of yourself is the truth of what you are, as long as you're caught in believing that there is a potential for the outcome to mean something about you. And so as that drops, as that concern drops, as you understand more and more clearly that your value can't go up, even if this goes well, your value is not going up at all. It's an experience that you're having. Through that, you can recognize much more clearly that it's not going to go down. It's impossible to go down. And then you're just stepping into things. It doesn't mean that you're following certain preferences or getting super caught in like, is this a ego-based decision or a reality of me based decision? It's like, it's always both and neither. It's always that. And so there doesn't have to be the additional concern for trying to measure which one it is. You're always in flow. Every decision you make is perfect, no matter what your idea of it is. And the more attentive you can be, the less concern you can have will dictate, the clarity of those decisions. It doesn't mean that the ones that are super caught in your idea of yourself aren't also in flow, but there is a spectrum that you can experience. And so the less concern you have for it, the more you realize that you can't escape the flow. There's less concern, there's less weight, there's less stress for every situation. And that's going to shift the decisions that you make. That's going to change the things that you do, the way you step into things, the way you perceive certain situations or think about certain situations. And so it's just a big part, in my opinion and experience, is just the letting go of that concern for what it means, the letting go of the idea that you can't even make a right or a wrong decision. It's just the decision that you're making. There isn't the need for the overarching, concern. Is this ego driven? Is this not ego driven? It is what it is. You are yourself. You are your environment. You are as much the experience as any other component of the experience. Like you have that influence in the moment. It doesn't mean anything about you, but you have the ability to make a decision. You don't know what it's going to mean. You don't know where it's going to go. There is no certainty in the decision. So there's no such thing as a right or a wrong decision. It's just the decision that you make and how little you cling to what it means about you or where you think it's going to take you. The more clarity, the less weight, the more freedom you're going to have as you experience that. And then that's going to shift the decisions that you make. But it's not so much about judging where it's coming from, because it's always coming from you. And it's your perspective of yourself that I think shifts how the decisions are made and which decisions are made.
Absolutely. And this is it. Like we kind of get in our way, like, quite frequently, and we don't keep things in perspective. Like I think one of the reasons that I'm so very grateful that so many different things that I've tried and so many different people that I've tried to be in my life have turned into ash. Because at the end of the day, now I'm always keeping that in perspective. Like, yeah, I don't have to do this. And yeah, I don't have to participate. I could just sit here on my ass. Absolutely. But then I might have to start all this shit over again, which is fine, But do I really want to do that? And if I don't want to do that, then I got to accept that I'm here because I chose to be here, and I'm going to do something. I'm going to get up off my ass and I'm going to do something. But it's largely because I keep in mind two things. I don't have to. I could start from scratch. That's it. See, I don't have to. I could start from scratch again. And that's always true. And both of those things are okay. Do I want to start from scratch? Is the question. That's really all it is. And if not, then I might as well study my biology. I might as well do the thing that I have a preference about. But you don't have to. And as long as you feel you have to, that's what makes it suck. Right? That's what makes it suck. It really is just about priority. Like somebody was asking here, hold on. What does one do when stuck in a state of inaction? Quite literally, what to do the next day. Stop asking what to do. Just do. Right? And well, what do? I guarantee if I set a fire in the middle of your floor, you wouldn't sit there asking me what to do. You'd get up and you would start trying to figure out real fast what to do next. Right? And it's just because all of a sudden that would be a priority. But it has to be a priority. It has to be a priority to you. And the only way it's going to be, unfortunately, is for you to decide that you are done with the suffering that you're currently experiencing. Nobody is going to make you want to act. There is no carrot that's going to keep you moving sustainably. Just your decision that you've experienced inaction enough. That's all it is. And then it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's action. It doesn't matter if you are writing an article. It doesn't matter if you're going for a walk. It doesn't matter if you're volunteering. It doesn't matter if you're exploring an area of town that you haven't explored before or learning a skill that you've never learned before. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's all action. You see, it's all you doing something that's unfamiliar. But me saying that there's a benefit to that is not motivation enough. You actually have to be sick of the alternative. You actually have to be done exploring that side in terms of inaction and go, yeah, but I know where that goes. So I'm going to go do that because I don't know where that goes. And that's it. It has to be worthwhile to you. Not because it should be, not because you see other people active, not because you think to yourself, well, maybe my life will be better. It won't be. It won't be. Life is still going to be life. Life is still going to be life. Doesn't matter if you're inactive or active, you are going to go up and down and have the whole emotional spectrum. That is life as a whole. But in action, there's more potential for experience. There's more potential for growth. There's more potential for all kinds of stuff that then you can take in a period of inaction and reflect on.
Exactly. Yeah. I think people get very caught in thinking that there's a right decision, there's a right way to do things. Like we're always getting caught in, oh, I gotta find the right way, gotta find the right decision. There's a correct decision out there, and I can't take action until I find it, because if I take action now, if I just follow my gut, maybe it'll be the wrong decision. Maybe I'll choose the wrong thing. And there's no such thing as that either. So it really does come down to, for me, when I'm feeling that way of like, oh, what do I do? It's this underlying assumption that there's a right thing to do, that there's a right way that I can spend this amount of time, that there's a right way that I can have this experience, that there's a right way to make any decision. And there isn't. There's no right way, and therefore there's no wrong way. And so relaxing into that, understanding that there isn't a way to find that certainty. Every decision that you make, every experience that you have is going to lead you down a brand new path to a bunch of other new experiences. Like every experience we have is informing every situation and experience that we're going to have. So there's no way to find the right thing to do when you're sitting in an action. Just do something. It really is that. There's no right decision. There's no right way to spend your day. Just go do something. Find out. It's not about figuring it out before you do something, because then you go do it. As soon as you start doing it, you're like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was, because it's not going to be the idea. Your idea of the right decision is not the reality of how it actually plays out. Your idea of the situation is never going to be the reality of the situation anyway. So you can sit there, sitting on your thumb, thinking about, oh, what is the best way to spend my time? Because you think there is, and there isn't. It's just you and your experience. What do you want to do with it? What do you want to find out? What do you want to explore? Just, you can find anything. But I really do think a lot of times it's the idea is that we know there's a right way. We think we can know a right way to spend that time. And we're told by people is the right way to live, the right way to be a high performer, the right way to be a high value woman or high value man. It's like none of that shit exists. It's all subjective. You want to be a high value person for someone else. Maybe that those people you want to attract or are trying to attract, you aren't even attracted to. And so there's this whole idea that there's a pinnacle of human success and action and the best way to be a person. And it doesn't exist. You're you. You have your experience. There's nothing you have to prove to anyone. There's no right way to live it. Just keep living it, because you are life. You don't have a life, not experiencing life. You're not in life. You are life. You're it. So everything that you do is conceivably the right decision, because it's the one that life is making each and every time. So you don't have to settle upon the idea that there's a right way to spend it, because there isn't. I think as you come to terms with that, it's going to be less so about what do I do? What decision do I make? And it's just make, just do, just keep moving forward, and you'll find out. But it's going to be a lot harder to find out. Not to say that you can't, but it's going to be harder to find out. You're sitting there wondering how to spend your time instead of just spending it.
As a very intelligent person once said, you are the truth, the way, and the life. And that's it. You are the way. There is no right way. You are the life. This is it. This is all you. So it really just comes down to being what you are. We are going to take a break for 15 minutes, and then we're going to continue on with a tier 1 call today. So if you would like to join us on Patreon, it's only $5 a month to do so. We have some guest hosts that are coming up this season, so I'm very excited about that. There will be more details about that next week. Patreon.com/dualistic unity. Thanks so much for joining us, as always, everyone. This has been a fun conversation. we look forward to seeing you shortly.